I've been asked to speak about hope, which I will be honest feels especially challenging given the state of the world that we're in. I live in California, which is a place that I love, but since COVID-19 began, my team and I haven't been able to work from our Hillel since March. I have two little kids at home. They're 4 and 2, and if I say so myself, they're pretty adorable, and yet we are tired of all being in the house together all the time. And for the last several weeks, they haven't been able to go outside because of smoke from wildfires. My beloved Stanford students, like so many of you throughout the world, aren't able to come back to our campus, and we are all struggling with disappointment, anger, and fear. We each have unique stories of this time, and yet there are threads of them that are the same, mostly that we are all struggling. 2020 has been a true Pandora's box with every plague, disease, disruption, racial injustice, civic unrest, the collapse of public leadership, lost jobs, lost relationships, lost time, fear, flood, fire, famine. According to the myth, the last creature left in Pandora's box is hope, who isn't terribly helpful. The message to the ancient Greeks was that suffering was a permanent condition, a part of life, the very nature of human life, and our lives collapsed or prospered on the whims of fickle gods. And yet this is fundamentally not a Jewish way to be oriented to the world. Avoidance, numbing, resignation, despair, tempting as they are not worthy of the Pintele Yid, this shining soul that God has placed in each of us. The Jewish orientation to the world is fundamentally one of hope, deeply pragmatic, cut through with gallows humor, and sometimes with a suitcase always packed in a corner, and yet fundamentally, ultimately, hopeful. Judaism doesn't negate the reality of suffering. Given our history, this would be an absurd position. But we aren't consigned to it either. The night is full of tears, the psalmist says, and we will face many long dark nights, but joy comes in the morning. We are the people who say they came to kill us, we survived, let's eat. Though maybe not for the next 24 hours. A century ago, the religious Zionist leader Rav Kook said, "If you find yourself in a dark place, don't waste your time cursing the darkness. Light a candle. That is the Jewish way." In our tradition, hope is not a thing with feathers. It is literally our national anthem. And the embodiment of our hope is Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi, prophet, shapeshifter, bestower of gifts. One day, Elijah will be the one who will stand at the Golden Gate and blow the shofar to announce the coming of the Messiah and the healing and the perfection of the world. It is our ongoing faith in this idea, our hope for this moment of possibility and transformation, that is the reason that we make space for him at every bris and every baby naming, every Passover Seder. Elijah is the symbol of our ongoing hope for redemption, our conviction that the seeds of this can be found at every birth, and every time we retell the story of the darkness of slavery and the light of liberation. So, you might ask, where the hell is he? I find myself asking this more regularly than I'm comfortable with lately. And then I try to think, where might Elijah be? If I were really to look for Elijah in our world, where would I find him? And my first sort of snarky response is, he's probably sheltering in place like the rest of us. But if I push through that feeling of cynicism, that moment of frustration, then I think, where would I find Elijah? And I would find him at the shoulder of a scientist who is working on a vaccine. I would find him coaching a teacher who is nervous about presenting to her class on Zoom and the challenge of engaging her students. I would find him as a first responder or in a hospital. I would find him out on the streets demanding justice, and I would find him registering someone to vote. These are the places where I find hope, where there is light in my world, and it is my job to spread that light, and it is your job to find the things that create light for you and help expand that light for all of us. This is how we will get through this together. This isn't the first time the Jewish people have experienced suffering, and this is not the worst that we have had it. We want to take some small, strange consolation from that. When the ghetto was first imposed on the Jews of Venice in 1516, it was an incredible shock. This was the most cosmopolitan city in the world, and its incredibly diverse community was suddenly crammed into a small area and the doors were locked at night. In such a setting, there was every reason for hopelessness. But Rabbi Stephen Kirschner teaches an amazing lesson from the stones of the ghetto. He points out that inscribed above the doorway of the Canton Skola, the smallest of the 4 synagogues in the ghetto, is this phrase, Nitchadesh shel sheyesh. Let us renew with what there is. This isn't a well-known Jewish teaching. You won't find it in the Talmud or the Torah. This is a message that the people who built that synagogue wrote for themselves. From where we are, we will build anew. In the darkness of their dislocation, when there was every reason to despair, they didn't. Instead, they built what they needed for themselves, and they crowned it with a pledge, not just to exist, but to thrive. This was their daily sermon to themselves and to their children. The word nitchadesh, let us renew, is in the future plural tense. It's a way of saying, we shall overcome. We will not abandon hope. We will renew. Even more, nitchadesh is a reflexive verb, something that you do to yourself. Those 3 words weren't a prayer asking God for help. They were a commitment and an acknowledgement that the Jews themselves were both the agents and the objects of their renewal. Third, most importantly, it was a reminder that the potential for renewal and transformation is always at hand. Nitchadesh shel sheyesh. This is our theme for these higher holidays. This is how we rise. We will renew with what there is. We will not focus on what is or isn't, on what has been lost, on what we no longer have. We will move forward with what we do have. As Jews have said for millennia, we'll make do. We will renew with what there is, and this is how we rise. We will open the door wherever we are, and lo, Elijah will be waiting on the other side. So I wonder what keeps us from opening the door to hope, from remaining in conversation with Elijah. Fear, isolation, numbness, and despair. These are the 4 horsemen of the spiritual apocalypse, but fear rides at the front. Our fears today are more present, more tangible, more truly terrifying than at almost any point in most of our lives. We have what to be afraid of, and yet, as impossible as it feels, we have to tame our fears and open our hearts towards trust in order to make space for hope. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel taught that hope is a conviction rooted in trust, an ability to soar above the darkness that overshadows the divine. Another word for that kind of trust is faith, but not a blind faith or a resigned faith. In Judaism, faith is not acceptance, but protest. Protest against the world as it is, in the name of the world that is not yet. A striving for what ought to be. Protest against the very belief that we are powerless to make change. This kind of faith is our bulwark against fear. When we live this faith, whether it's working in a food pantry or protesting peacefully with fellow citizens or sending postcards or making sure people are able to vote, when we take actions that embody our hope, we make room for Elijah and we start to feel better. A friend once told me the story of her grandmother, a Hungarian Jewish woman who survived Auschwitz. She was pregnant when she arrived at the camp, but her pregnancy wasn't spotted. She managed to conceal it until one night in a barrack with 1,000 other women, she went into labor. The midwife from her home community helped her with the delivery, which to everyone's surprise, yielded an infant who was born alive. The mother and the midwife and everyone there knew that that baby could not survive, that it would mean death to everyone else in that space. And as the midwife took the baby away, she told my friend's grandmother, "This baby cannot survive, but you will survive. You will live to have more children. This is the very darkest place, but it is not the end, and you must have hope." So, how do we do it? How do we tap into that stubborn streak of pragmatic hope, which is our birthright? Choice by choice, action after action, story on top of story, we forge our path. We can emerge from the crucible of this time disappointed, embittered, cynical, and there are many people waiting to profit off of this kind of disillusionment. Or we can do the Jewish thing. We can use this opportunity to cultivate kindness, gratitude, and most of all, resilience. I'm not trying to say that this is easy, that there isn't pain enough in life to break every heart. But the wounds that we sustain in this epic struggle to always cleave to hope, these are our battle wounds. They are the scars that we should point to with honor, as if to say, this is what I fight for. Yom Kippur is a day of judgment, forcing us to look at our choices over the last year. What a gift, really, to have this kind of time to reflect on who we've been and who we want to be. It's an annual opportunity, until it isn't. And then the Talmud teaches we will stand before the heavenly court and be asked questions about how we spent our time here on earth. We'll be asked, did you conduct your business affairs honorably? Did you make time for Torah study? And the last question of all, did you expect deliverance and redemption? Was Elijah a frequent companion on your journey? May we all, this year, every year, but especially this year, do our best to answer that question in the affirmative, because this is how we rise. And may we each be sealed this year in the book of life for health, for prosperity, for justice, and for peace.